Michael Hurwicz here for CreativeCow.net. In this tutorial we're going to be looking at the spring property in inverse kinematics in Flash CS5. And this is a new feature in Flash CS5. And by the way, I've also created a basics tutorial on inverse kinematics in Flash. So if you're new to inverse kinematics in Flash, you might want to take a look at that first. Here we have a figure. It's composed of three symbols. Here are the symbols in the library: body, end, and head. So this is the end symbol. It's just a little circle. And this is the head symbol. And by the way, I found that if I don't have this third symbol here, I can't create the armature that I want to create. What I want to do is create a two-bone armature, starting here, one bone ending here, and another bone going up to here. Let me just show you this. I can select these two, go to my bone tool, start here, and I can create the first bone. But no matter what I do, I cannot create that second bone with just these two symbols. So now I'm going to Control Z to undo all that. Bring my little end symbol back here, select all three of those. Get my bone tool again, start here, and now by going up there, it allows me to create that two-bone armature. And by the way, if I want to, I could now go into that end symbol and even just delete that. So let me just Control Enter and take a look at this. So you can see there's nothing there, and yet the armature still works. I can actually create the symbol but then delete the contents of it afterwards. And first I'm just going to delete this layer here since it doesn't have anything in it anymore. I'm on my selection tool, go here, and the armature still works just fine. So that's just a little trick. If you want to create a two-bone armature, you can create a third symbol and delete the contents of it. Now I'm just going to Control Z to undo that animation. So my first step is to extend my timeline. I'm going to extend it to frame 100. Click on frame 100, which is that dark frame there, and hit F5. And the timeline is extended to frame 100. Then I'm going to go to frame 5 and hit F6 to create a keyframe there. So that little dot there is my keyframe. And now I'll put in my animation. I've got the selection tool. Just grab this and animate. Now let's just take a look at this now. Creates that animation, but afterwards there's no action all the way up to frame 100. All the action takes place between frames 1 and 5, and then it's still after that. Now I go in and I'll select this bone here, go to the Properties panel, and here we have the spring property. The strength indicates how springy the spring is, or how stiff it is. If the strength is 0, there's no springiness at all. But if it's a low number, it's a very springy, loose spring. The higher the number gets, all the way up to the maximum of 100, the stiffer the spring gets. So I want a very loose spring. I'm just going to put in quite a low number here. I'll leave that at 9. Damping makes the springy result eventually die away. The higher the damping number, the faster it dies away. I'm not going to put in any damping right now. So now if I scroll through my timeline, you can see that springy action there. That head continues to move because the bone in the head there has springy action on it. So let's just Control Enter and see if this works in test. Yes. So that's the springy action of that head. Let's go back here. Let's add some springy action to the other bone here. Click on this bone, give it just a little bit of spring so it's a nice loose spring. That's at 11, and Control Enter. So it looks like that's not doing anything, but I often find that's true on the first test, or even the second test. It may not seem to be working, and then later on it'll start to work. Let's Control Enter again. There we go. So now the body has its springiness. Now one nice thing here is that you can still go into these symbols and edit them. So let's go back to the library here. I'll just double click to select that head. And for example, I could put some spots on him. Let's just put some nice bright red spots on him. Control S to save, Control Enter to test. So that's not a problem. Once you have your symbols working and your spring going, you can still go back in and edit your symbols. In fact, you can even create armatures within your symbols. So for example, let's give a little bit of spring to this tail. I'll go into the body. I'm going to Control minus to make this a little smaller, get my selection tool, select the whole thing, go to the bone tool. I'll just Control plus now to get in a little bit closer. And I'm making my bones smaller and smaller as I go out. Then go to my selection tool, select this bone, go to the Properties panel, and give that a little bit of springiness. I'll delete this layer here, and Control S to save. Now I have to extend my timeline here out to 100 again. F5 extends the timeline. So this is exactly the same procedure as before. Go to frame 5, hit F6 to create a keyframe, and I've already got my selection tool. Create that animation. And let's try Control Entering now. So that didn't work out very well. Let's X out of that. I'm just going to Control Z to undo everything I've done here. And I'm back to just having a layer. So you notice this went wild over here. I should have started my armature back here so that this would remain still. So now I'm going to do that. I've got the whole thing selected, get my bone tool, start right here. That will make that the still point of the armature. And then go up here, and up here, and up here, and up here. Get my selection tool, click on this bone. I'm already in the Properties panel, and give that a little bit of spring. Now let's Control Enter. So by putting the still point of the armature at the neck there, I prevented that from going wild. Let's give each one of these a little bit of springiness all the way up the line. I'm going to just delete this layer here. Let's go back to our main scene here. Let's take the springiness out of this bone so that that won't be moving around, and we'll be able to see that tail move a little better. And Control Enter. Let's go back to the library and to the body. So F5, F6. I've already got my selection tool. Give this a little bit of movement. And now let's see how this works. Control Enter. There we go. Now we have a waving tail. Now you'll notice that that waving tail is deforming the body quite a bit. If you don't want that, there's a way to get out of that as well. So I'm going to just Control Z to undo all this. So let's see, go back to the body. Another way to get rid of an armature, by the way, is just to right-click here and remove armature. Now I'm going to double-click on this tail and hit F8 to turn that into its own symbol. I'll call it tail, and you can see that that appeared in the library there. Now I'm just going to put the armature in the tail, nothing in the body at all. Double-click and get inside that. Choose the bone tool. Choose the selection tool. I'm going to get rid of this layer here. Give these bones some springiness. Go out to frame 100. F5. Back to frame 5. I like to use the same frames, by the way, because it makes everything have a similar timing in the movement. It makes the movements look coordinated. And hit F6. Already got the selection tool, and just pull that down. And the only problem is the body needs a little editing so that it doesn't look like we've got a hole there. But first, let's just Control Enter and see how this is working. So it's basically working. We have the tail wagging and the body is not being distorted. However, we do have a hole in the body. So we can go back to the library, double-click on the body here. I'll just pull this out of the way. Choose the paintbrush. Get this same color. Fill that in. Get the selection tool. Bring this back again. And let's see how that works. And Control Enter. And X out of that. Now let's go back to the main scene here. Choose this bone, get into the Properties panel, and give that some springiness again. And let's see what we've got. Control Enter. Once again, that didn't work that time, but you can see here that it is working. Sometimes on Control Enter it doesn't work the first time or even the second time, but if you have perseverance it usually works. So let's try Control Enter again. There we go. And the tail is moving. It's a little bit hard to see with all the other movement going on, but that tail is actually wagging while the body is doing its thing as well. So that concludes this tutorial on working with springs in Flash CS5. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope this has been helpful.